All right, everybody, you've made it to part 4. This is the video that's going to focus on the inguinal canal structure, so let's go. So external oblique aponeurosis is actually most of your inguinal canal. It makes up most of the canal itself. It makes up the roof and the sides of the entrance and this sort of wall, which would be your more external wall. So I'm going to draw that tunnel as we go through these next parts. So we know that underneath external oblique is internal oblique and its aponeurosis, as well as transversus abdominis and its aponeurosis. And one thing I didn't mention, and is very hard to see in this picture because this picture was just to show you the rectus abdominis, is that at the point of the arcuate line, the tendons of our internal oblique and our transversus abdominis kind of fuse and become what's called the conjoint tendon. And we can see a portion of the conjoint tendon that is making up the internal wall of this tunnel just inside the entrance of this space, the superficial inguinal ring. So I'm going to draw a tunnel version of this down here so that we can see what we're looking at. But then I draw the whole entire thing partially off screen, so we have revised and created a PowerPoint version. Here we can see the deep and superficial inguinal rings, the roof of the canal made up by the external oblique aponeurosis, the side of the superficial inguinal ring created by the medial and lateral crura of the external oblique aponeurosis, the floor made up by the inguinal ligament, which was a thickened portion of the external oblique aponeurosis that will then widen out in the superficial inguinal ring to become the lacunar ligament. And underneath, or deep to the inguinal ligament, but drawn so you can actually see it, is the pectineal ligament, which would be on the pectineal line of the pubic bone. So the only missing piece of this canal is the medial or internal wall, and that is created by the conjoint tendon, also called the inguinal falx, which is a joining of the internal oblique aponeurosis and the transversus abdominis aponeurosis, a conjoined tendon. Now the truth is, what makes up the walls of the tunnel changes as the tunnel comes from internal to external and lateral to medial. But what you normally get tested on, especially in the lab, is the boundaries of this inguinal canal closest to the superficial inguinal ring, and those are the ones I just taught you. Here is our inguinal canal on a pelvis, and you can see how the reality of the deep inguinal ring is not so lateral that it would touch and open onto the ASIS where the inguinal ligament attaches, but instead it's going to poke through each layer of the anterior abdominal wall at an angle, and thus the boundaries would change based on what part of the canal you are talking about. Are you talking about the deepest portion of the canal, or are you talking about the most superficial portion of the canal, or are you talking about the middle? The boundaries I taught you are the ones they're probably going to test you on in lab. Okay, I just wanted to go through this from a different view. So I'm going to erase this very quickly, but this is pubic symphysis, pubic tubercle. So that'd be symphysis. Tubercle is where our lacunar ligament is actually attaching, which I've drawn in here. So I just wanted you to have reference. This is all those layers of your anterior abdominal wall. And we're going to walk through and label each one, and then I'm going to show you how the canal's walls change. I wanted to make that really, really clear because I know it's a little bit confusing. This is the external oblique muscle, and that makes this its aponeuroses. And its aponeuroses contributes lots of different parts to our inguinal canal, especially very superficially. So like if we split this into, there's a deep portion of the canal, a middle portion, and a superficial portion, external oblique is going to contribute so much to our superficial portion, since it makes up essentially almost the entire superficial inguinal ring. So we have our external oblique aponeurosis. And we know that our external oblique aponeurosis, if we follow it with our hand, splits and has a medial and a lateral cruce. I'm going to add those labels now. And then at the opening, we can see our lacunar ligament fanning out towards our pubic tubercle, which means our inguinal ligament, which is the sort of rolling and thickening of our external oblique aponeurosis underneath, is going to run in this direction. So I'll kind of add it in like this. That's going to go up to the ASIS. This portion would be that inguinal ligament, but that's a deeper structure, so it's kind of hard to show. This next layer is our internal oblique muscle and its aponeurosis. Notice this white portion I've kind of drawn in a dotted line here. We'll talk about it more later. There's a hole in it because that's actually where the inguinal canal goes through the muscle, picks up some of its fibers, And for individuals with testes, it actually becomes your cremaster muscle. It's derived from muscle fibers of your internal oblique muscle. Your cremaster muscle keeps your testes at the right temperature when they're in their scrotum. It helps you pull them closer to your body and bring them farther away from your body. So here's the internal oblique muscle, and here's its aponeurosis. Here's our transversus abdominis muscle right behind it, and its aponeurosis. And I want to draw attention to its aponeurosis and the internal oblique's aponeurosis come together and go in front of this structure, which is our rectus abdominis. So we can actually see the conjoining, get it? Conjoint tendon becoming the conjoint tendon, and then this portion of our comboed internal and transversus abdominis aponeuroses would make up this portion of the wall. So when we look at the superficial version, when you look through the superficial inguinal ring, which I'm now going to outline in red, you can see conjoint tendon, you can see lacunar ligament, you can see the medial and lateral crus. What are these 3 layers? Now I taught you there were only 2 more layers, and there are, but I added in this orange layer to make some other things make sense, hopefully. This purple layer is our transversalis fascia, and the orange layer is extraperitoneal fat. So extra because it's outside of the peritoneum, because you have to be inside, so deep to the parietal peritoneum to be in the peritoneal cavity. So this is technically fat that is lining and outside of the peritoneum, which makes this blue layer the parietal peritoneum. Okay, we have all of our layers, and now we can see how the inguinal canal goes through them, and I'll point out your deep inguinal ring as well. Our deep inguinal ring is really a hole punch through our transversalis fascia, about here. Punches through the hole in our transversalis fascia. Then it goes through the transversus abdominis muscle, through the internal oblique muscle and its aponeurosis. You can see how at one point its walls were very different back here. Then when we come forward and the conjoint tendon becomes a wall. It wasn't always a wall, but it is an internal wall as we come out towards the external environment. So I really just wanted to point out how this tunnel's boundaries change. Based on the location you're talking about, the boundaries of this tunnel change. I take a long time to explain this, so I'm just going to speed it up. Basically, I show you how a structure like the vas deferens would go through the parietal peritoneum and extraperitoneal fat and get into the deep inguinal ring, to travel through it and get to the scrotum, to just review a little bit, in an effort to remind you of the canal's purpose. Thank you for watching, and that concludes our inguinal canal video. Our final video in this series will cover the posterior aspect of the anterior abdominal wall from the internal view.